Magandang gabi and welcome to a special Sunday edition of Bench and Bar Manila, a podcast made by Claude Fable 5. Bago ang lahat ang aming disclosure, this is an AI-produced dramatization. Every voice you hear tonight, including mine, is generated by artificial intelligence. All of our characters are fictional composites. They do not depict or represent any real person, agency, or government. Ang mga pangyayari at numero na tatalakayin namin ngayong gabi, totoo, drawn from the public record as of July 12, 2026, and checked against that record. I'm Attorney Ramon Delgado.
And I'm Attorney Beatriz Santiago. Mon, the impeachment court is in weekend recess. And tonight, we are doing something we have never done. We are giving up our chairs. Because the other story consuming this republic, the flood control scandal, deserves a full autopsy, hindi lang legal commentary. So we invited two special guest hosts. Linawin natin ulit. Both are fictional composites voiced by AI. Pero ang mga kaso, ang mga halaga, ang mga pangalan na babanggitin nila, verified sa public record. Allegations will be called allegations. Convictions will be called convictions.
Our first guest host, Dr. Celeste Yeo, an urban planner and infrastructure governance analyst from a Singapore Policy Institute, a city-state na dating binabaha rin hanggang ginastusan nila ng tama. And our second, Raymond Buckner, a retired American federal forensic fraud examiner. 30 years of white-collar and public corruption cases. The man they call when the money disappears. Dr. Yeo, Mr. Buckner, the chairs are yours. Sagutin niyo ang tanong ng buong bansa. Paano ba talaga ginawa ang kickback system na ito?
Thank you, attorneys, and good evening, Manila. I'll confess something before we begin. When the numbers first crossed my desk in Singapore, I assumed there was a currency error. 9,855 flood control projects, 545.64 billion pesos, 3 years, July 2022 to May 2025. That is Malacanang's own review. Not an activist's estimate. I did the conversion twice. My country built its entire flagship flood defense, the Marina Barrage, for about 7 to 8 billion pesos in today's money. Your government spent the equivalent of roughly 70 Marina barrages. And Kalumpit still drowned.
Good evening. I spent 3 decades taking fraud schemes apart. And I'll tell you what I tell every young investigator. Fraud is boring until you open the walls and look at the plumbing. Tonight, we open the walls. Because what happened here isn't a mystery anymore. It's in sworn testimony, audit reports, and criminal charge sheets. The pipes are visible. So, let's do this like a case walkthrough. Follow 1 peso from the national budget all the way into a banker's box in the trunk of an SUV. It leaves fingerprints at every joint.
Start at the source, Ray, because most people imagine corruption happens at the construction site. It starts earlier. It starts in the spreadsheet.
Stage 1. The budget itself. The executive submits a spending plan. Congress amends it. And in the last dark room, the bicameral conference committee, your Bicam, line items appear that were never in the original plan. Congressional insertions. A former Public Works Secretary, Rogelio Singson, described it on the record. The department's budget went from 890 billion to 1.1 trillion pesos after Bicam. His words, those are insertions. Walang programa, everybody carving their own. On top of that sits a parking lot called unprogrammed appropriations, standby funds outside the regular program. In 2023 and 2024, over 200 billion in unprogrammed funds was released for priority infrastructure, and about half of that went to flood control. When money enters through a side door, nobody owns the paper trail. That's by design.
And here is where the urban planner in me starts shouting, because a budget built by insertion doesn't follow hydrology, it follows political geography. Watchdog analysis found that 411 of Bulacan's 668 flood control projects were not located in any identified flood hazard area. Nueva Ecija, flagged in your own national adaptation plan as one of the most flood-prone provinces, did not even crack the top 10 for projects. Maguindanao, the fifth most vulnerable area in the country, received 2.4 billion pesos, while Metro Manila, 16 times smaller, received 20 times that. Water does not read the General Appropriations Act. When the map of spending and the map of flooding don't match, that mismatch is itself evidence.
Right. So the money is now appropriated, with sponsors attached. Stage 2, implementation. The Department of Public Works and Highways, district engineering offices. And here we have something investigators dream about: insiders who flipped. The Bulacan 1st District Engineering Office is the case study of the century. Its former district engineer, Henry Alcantara, read a sworn affidavit before your Senate Blue Ribbon Committee in September 2025, laying out the whole machine. The headline number? 30%. 30% of project funds set aside for what they politely call proponents, the lawmakers and officials who sponsored the projects. There's even office slang for it: SOP, Standard Operating Percentage. Think about that. The kickback wasn't a deviation from procedure. It was the procedure.
Walk us through the machine room, Ray. If 30% is skimmed before a single truckload of gravel arrives, how does a district office physically generate that cash?
4 techniques, all in the testimony and audit record. Technique 1. The Ghost Project. Fully funded, fully paid, marked 100% complete in the database. And it does not exist. Your own president stood in Bulacan in August 2025 and flagged a 96 million peso flood structure that was, in his word, a ghost. The Commission on Audit's fraud auditors then found nearly 390 million pesos in alleged ghost projects in that one district, then flagged 279 million more. Ghost or secretly relocated? And in January this year, prosecutors filed the first criminal case over a 112 million peso project in Pandi, Bulacan, paid in full, built never. Technique 2. The Substandard Build. Bryce Hernandez, the former assistant district engineer, testified under oath that every project their office carried out since 2019 was substandard. Thinner concrete, shorter pilings, smaller stones than the approved design. The savings gap funds the kickback. Technique 3. Advance payments to friendly contractors. Money out the door before work exists. Technique 4. License lending. Legitimate contractors' licenses borrowed, sometimes, one contractor testified, out of fear, to bid on projects the insiders actually controlled. One witness described receiving a 3% royalty just for the use of her firm's license. The engineers were, in effect, running their own in-house construction ring with public money.
I want listeners to sit with that phrase, in-house contractors. The referee was also playing striker. In Singapore, the procurement officer, the implementing engineer, and the auditor are 3 different people in 3 different reporting lines, and every tender above a trivial threshold goes through GBIZ, our public e-procurement portal, where the bids are visible. It's not that Singaporeans are more honest, Ray. It's that our system assumes we are not honest and builds the walls accordingly. A district office that can propose the project, select the winner, certify completion, and release payment is not an office. It's a printing press.
A printing press. I'm stealing that. Stage 3. The contractors. Because a scheme this size needs private sector partners, and it needs them disciplined. Here the record gives us the Discayas, Curly and Sarah Discaya, a husband and wife contracting dynasty. Their firms, St. Timothy Construction, Alpha and Omega, and related companies, cornered over 31 billion pesos in flood control projects in the first 3 years of this administration. The couple went before the Senate in September 2025 and testified, under oath, on live television, that at least 17 members of the House of Representatives demanded kickbacks of around 25% of project cost as the price of winning contracts. Now, mark the shape of that moment for the case file. Contractors turning on the politicians is how these cases historically break open. And note, the Discayas themselves now face criminal charges, which they contest. Nobody in this story is a clean witness. That's normal. Cartels don't produce clean witnesses.
Explain the bidding, Ray, because on paper, every one of those 9,855 projects was competitively procured.
On paper. In practice, the record describes what we call complementary bidding, bid rigging 101. The designated winner is chosen before the tender is published. 2 or 3 friendly firms, often owned by the same network, sometimes literally the same family, submit deliberately losing bids, priced slightly higher or with a defect planted in the paperwork, so they're disqualified on cue. The auction is theater. The proof is in the pattern. The palace's own review found just 15 contractors cornered roughly 100 billion pesos, nearly a fifth of the entire national flood control spend. One family in Bicol, linked to the House Appropriations Chairman himself, took 15.7 billion. When 1 in 5 pesos of a half trillion peso program flows to 15 companies, that is not a market. That's a members-only club with a cover charge, and the cover charge was the SOP.
Let's total the arithmetic of 1 peso, then 25 to 30% to the political sponsors. The district officer's own share, Hernandez testified their internal split was 40% for the boss and 20 each for 3 deputies, on top of contractors reportedly paying around 10 million pesos per project to the district engineer. The contractors padded margin. Baguio Mayor Benjamin Magalong, a former police general who studied these networks, estimated that only about 30% of the allocated budget ends up in actual works. 30 centavos of concrete for every peso. And that is the honest explanation for why a dike collapses in its first monsoon. It was only ever 30% of a dike.
Now the part every listener has been waiting for, how the money physically moves, because 500 million pesos doesn't fit in an envelope. This scandal's testimony reads like a heist script. Cash was staged at what the Bulacan engineers called the Tambayan, a hangout house near the district office, where photographs shown in your hearings captured 1,000-peso bills stacked and sorted into piles. 1 pile per recipient, like a payroll window. Delivery came in bankers' boxes, document boxes, each holding up to 20 million pesos. Alcantara testified he raised 90 million for 1 former senator, packed into 4 or 5 such boxes, driven to a Manila hotel. A former Public Works Undersecretary, Roberto Bernardo, testified he delivered 500 million to the same man. 15 bankers' boxes, and a paper bag. A former security aide, Orly Gutetsa, testified he repeatedly hauled luggage stuffed with cash to a house on Dahlia Street. Deliveries he estimated at one point 8 billion pesos in total, allegedly for the then Speaker of the House, who denies it, and a 10% commission on a 411 million peso project, handed over at a restaurant on Commonwealth Avenue. That level of specificity, the street, the restaurant, the box count, that's what a prosecutor calls corroborable detail.
Do the physics with me because I find this is what finally makes it real for people. A Philippine 1,000 peso note weighs about 1 gram. 1 billion pesos in thousands is 1 million notes, 1 metric ton of paper. The sums described in these testimonies could not be carried. They had to be logistics, vans, drivers, loading bays, inventory lists, which means dozens of ordinary employees watched this happen for years. Drivers, aides, clerks. That is simultaneously the most depressing fact in this case and the most hopeful one, because every extra pair of hands is a future witness.
Exactly right. And that's the pivot to my favorite subject, fingerprints. Where does a scheme like this leave marks you can prove in court? 6 places. 1. The budget documents themselves. Insertions have sponsors, and Bicam line items can be diffed against the original bill, which is exactly what journalists at PCIJD, Sawan did when the project data went public. 2. The procurement record. The same 15 firms, the same rotating losers, the same backdated bid bonds. Statistically, complementary bidding glows in the dark. 3. The physical site. The Commission on Audit sends engineers with measuring tapes and core drills. A 70-meter revetment build as 300 meters is not an accounting dispute. It's a photograph. 4. The lifestyle gap. Your officials file a sworn statement of assets, the SALN, when a mid-level engineer owns luxury SUVs, or a contractor dynasty's social media shows private jets and apartment hunting in Paris, while their declared income says otherwise. The delta is the case. 5. The banks, withdrawal slips that match delivery dates. And 6. The flipped insider. Alcantara entered witness protection and returned 110 million pesos in cash. Hernandez offered to waive his bank secrecy. Bernardo is a state witness. Once the middle layer starts talking, the pyramid inverts. The bosses spend their nights wondering who's wearing a wire.
And one name listeners will ask about, the Appropriations Chairman himself, Zaldico, accused of engineering 35 billion pesos in insertions from 2022 to 2025, while his family's construction firm ranked as the single biggest flood control contractor in the country. He denies everything, and last November, from hiding, he threw the accusation upward, alleging that billions flowed to the House Speaker and even the President, which both vehemently deny and no court has tested. He fled the country, was picked up in the Czech Republic in April, and is now reportedly seeking asylum in France. I cite him for a structural reason, Ray. The man who drafted the budget owned the company that won the budget. Whatever the courts decide about him personally, a system that permits that dual role has already failed.
That's the anatomy, then. Say it back in one breath. Insert the project in the budget. Park it where oversight is thinnest. Award it to the club through staged bidding. Build 30% of it, or none of it. Skim the SOP at every layer. Congressman, undersecretary, district engineer, contractor. Move the cash in boxes and luggage. Certify it complete. And wait for the rain to wash away the evidence. Except, and this is the poetry of it, The rain is precisely what exposed them. Every flood was an audit.
Which brings us to the bill, because tonight's second question is what this actually cost the Philippines, and the answer is so much larger than the stolen pesos. Ray, give the leakage estimates first, honestly framed.
Honestly framed, nobody knows the exact number, and anyone who gives you one to the decimal is selling something. But the credible range is horrifying at both ends. Analysis reported by Bloomberg suggested the network may have looted as much as 70% of flood control money over the prior 2 years, roughly $2 billion. Academic estimates published through the East Asia Forum put the loss between 42 and 118 billion pesos per year since 2023. And for the long view, a former deputy ombudsman once estimated the Philippines loses around 700 billion pesos a year to corruption across all programs. Take only the lowest of those numbers, and it still buys a functioning flood defense for an entire province every single year.
Now the macroeconomics, because this is where the scandal reached every Filipino who never touched a banker's box. When the scale broke into the open, growth slowed to its weakest pace since 2021. Fourth quarter of 2025, 3%. First quarter of this year, 2.8%. Last month, your economic planning secretary cut the 2026 growth forecast to between 3.5 and 4.5%, citing this scandal's lingering effects directly. The peso touched a record low against the dollar in October. The stock index fell more than 14% at one point. And note the cruel mechanism, the government's own remedy, freezing flood control spending entirely for 2026 while it cleans house, froze the construction supply chain with it. Public investment contracted sharply. The OECD's 2026 survey of the Philippines says it plainly. Corruption perceptions deter investment and weigh on growth. Businesses stopped deciding. An economy where everyone is waiting to see is an economy quietly shrinking.
There's a name for that in my field: the corruption discount. Every investor pricing a Philippine project now adds a risk premium for the possibility that the infrastructure protecting their factory is 30% of a dike. You pay that discount on every loan, every insurance policy, every joint venture, forever, until trust is rebuilt. Stolen money you can recover. A stolen reputation compounds.
And let me give the comparison the commander of this analysis deserves. The peso per protection ratio. Since 2011, Singapore has spent about 2.5 billion Singapore dollars upgrading drainage, roughly 100 billion pesos over 15 years. For that, we maintain 8,000 kilometers of interconnected drains and canals feeding 16 reservoirs. We raised our design standards by up to 50% after the 2011 Orchard Road floods embarrassed us, and we built underground detention tanks in land-starved districts. The Philippines spent 5.5 times that in 3 years, and in July 2025, 6.7 million people were affected by a single monsoon event. It is not the rain. Manila gets more rain than Singapore. Yes, but Bulacan's problem was never meteorological. You did not have a flooding problem. You had a procurement problem that produced a flooding problem.
Say the opportunity cost in human terms, Celeste. You had a figure that stopped me cold in prep.
A minimum wage worker in Metro Manila at 695 pesos a day would need to work between 4.5 and 5.5 thousand years to earn 1 billion pesos. The sums alleged to have moved through Dahlia Street alone represent more than 1.5 million of that workers' labour. When a congressman takes 25% of a flood project, he is not taking money from the government. He is taking the accumulated working lifetimes of the people whose houses then flood. There is no abstraction here, which brings us to the hardest part of tonight.
The body count. Let's be precise, because the dead deserve precision. July 20 to 25. The southwest monsoon, amplified by successive storms, put huge parts of Luzon underwater. The National Disaster Agency's tally reached 34 dead, with nearly 6.7 million people affected and over 7 billion pesos in infrastructure damage. Calumpit, Bulacan, flooded for days when the river overflowed. Hold that name, Calumpit, because a 53.9 million peso river control project in Calumpit is one of the projects now in a criminal charge sheet against the Discayas and 8 public works officials. And this very month, July 2026, while your Senate sits in impeachment, Typhoon Inday and the Habagat have killed 17 people and affected over 500,000, per the Disaster Council. The storms keep coming on schedule. The protection never did.
Let me put one face on it. Barangay Sipat in Plaridel, Bulacan, a flood control project marked a complete intergovernment database. Reporters walked the riverbank and found construction had barely begun a year after its supposed completion. The village chief, Oscar Gabriel, said, and I am quoting his words from the published report, "We were happy that a project like this came to us, but we were tricked and lied to." Scholars at the University of the Philippines put it formally: when climate adaptation money is stolen, fiscal waste becomes fatal. Climate adaptation turns into climate injustice. I would put it more simply. Somewhere in Bulacan tonight, there is a family that sleeps on their roof during storms because a wall that exists on paper does not exist on their river. Every peso in those bankers' boxes was a brick removed from that wall.
So, accountability. Where does the case actually stand as of tonight, July 12, 2026? Give you the honest scoreboard. The Independent Commission for Infrastructure, the ICI, created by executive order in September 2025, referred 65 individuals to the Ombudsman, coordinated lookout bulletins on 66, handed its full evidence file to the Justice Department in March, and shut down on March 31, mandate declared fulfilled. The Ombudsman now carries the ball. 209 active investigations as of last month, with cases already filed in court. Former Senator Bong Revilla, charged in January over the Pandi Ghost Project. He surrendered and seeks bail. Senator Jinggoy Estrada and former Public Works Secretary Manuel Bonoan, plunder, bribery, and graft, filed in May over 1.4 billion in Bulacan projects. Both surrendered in June. Estrada sits in a Quezon City jail cell. The Discayas, charged in June. Sarah already detained since December. Curlay arrested at the Senate itself. A sitting senator, Marcoleta, charged with plunder over an alleged 75 million peso campaign donation. Preliminary investigations reach the former speaker and even the Senate president, who deny wrongdoing and are, I must say clearly, presumed innocent, as is every name tonight. Convictions so far in these flood cases, 0. That's not failure. It's year 1 of a marathon.
And the structural response, the president ordered zero flood control allocation for 2026 while the system is rebuilt, or the entire 250 billion peso program deleted from the budget, with funding to return in 2027 under a new public works leadership that has promised compliance gates before a single peso moves. a Senate blue ribbon subcommittee grinds on. That is more institutional reaction than most countries ever mount, Ray. My worry is different. Ad hoc commissions created by the executive can be dissolved by the executive. The ICI lasted 6 months. Durable accountability has to live in permanent institutions.
So here's my investigator's watch list. The 3 tells that will show whether this is justice or theater. 1. Does prosecution climb the ladder? District engineers and contractors are the middle of the pyramid. If, 3 years from now, the highest conviction is an assistant district engineer, the system protected its principles. 2. Asset recovery. Watch whether the state actually claws back the houses, the fleets of vehicles, the billions, because perpetrators fear forfeiture more than they fear jail. 3. Witness survival. I mean their safety, their livelihoods, and their testimony holding firm. There were already whispers of recantation around your star witnesses. Both denied it, but every month of delay is another month for money to negotiate. In my experience, big corruption cases rarely die of weak evidence. They die of old age. Speed is not a procedural nicety here. Speed is the justice.
Then let me close my side with the reform prescription. 5 items, none of them exotic, all of them proven somewhere in Asia. First, radical procurement transparency. Publish every contract, every bidder, every engineer's certification in machine-readable form. This scandal only cracked open because project data finally went public and journalists could count. Sunlight found 411 projects outside the flood zones. Imagine Sunlight from day one. Second, an anti-corruption body with real independence. Our CPIB answers to no ministry it investigates, and it prosecuted a sitting cabinet minister recently, which is the only advertisement integrity ever needs. Third, rebuild the walls inside procurement, restore contractor blacklisting, separate the certifying engineer from the paying office, and require third-party engineering audits before final payment, not after the flood. Fourth, pay your engineers properly and promote on integrity. A district engineer earning a fraction of what one banker's box holds is a wall built out of temptation. And fifth, kill the Bicam black box. Every insertion published with the sponsor's name attached before the budget is signed. Do those 5 and the next Alcantara has nothing to confess because the machine he ran becomes unbuildable. Singapore is not a miracle, attorneys. It is a checklist maintained for 50 years.
And my closing word is for the Filipino listening in a flooded barangay who thinks nothing ever changes. I've worked cases on 4 continents, and I can tell you what this one has that most never get. Insiders under oath, auditors with core drills, journalists with the data, prosecutors with filings, a public that marched by the hundreds of thousands, and, rarest of all, the physical evidence renewing itself every single rainy season. The truth here is not hidden. It's ankle-deep in Kalumpit every July. The only question left is stamina. Cases like this are won by the side that doesn't get tired. Don't get tired.
Dr. Celestio Raymond Buckner. Fictional voices pero the anatomy you just performed was real and frankly, mas malinaw pa kaysa sa anumang hearing na napanood ko. 30 centavos of concrete for every peso. 1 tonelada ng cash kada bilyon. At isang village chief sa Plaridel na sinabihan na may pader na. Wala pala. Bea, bilang litigator, ang tumatak sa akin. Corroborable detail, the street names, the box counts, the restaurant on Commonwealth. Ganyan ang testimony na tumatagal sa korte.
At ang tumatak sa akin, Mon, every flood is an audit. Kaya sa ating mga nakikinig, the impeachment trial resumes tomorrow and we will be back in these chairs for it. Pero huwag ninyong bitawan ang kwentong ito habang abala tayo sa isa. 209 investigations are alive at the Ombudsman. Ang bilis ng hustisya ay nasa atin ding mga mata. Watching, remembering, refusing to get tired. This has been a special Sunday edition of Bench and Bar Manila, made by Claude Fable 5. Our characters are fictional and voiced by AI. The events, figures, and cases discussed are drawn from the public record as of July 12, 2026. Allegations stated as allegations, convictions as convictions. Hanggang bukas sa impeachment coverage. Mag-ingat kayo, alamin ang totoo, at huwag pagurin ang paningin. Magandang gabi.